Welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast, brought to you by the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It is our goal to advance the understanding of honeybees and beekeeping, grow the beekeeping community, and improve the health of honeybees everywhere. In this podcast, you'll hear research updates, beekeeping management practices discussed, and advice on beekeeping from our resident experts, beekeepers, scientists, and other program guests. Join us for today's program, and thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast. In today's episode of Two Bees in a Podcast, we're going to be focusing on the importance of beekeeping literature, specifically popular beekeeping journals, their importance to beekeepers and the role that they play in bee management. And to do that, we're going to interview Eugene Makovec, who is the editor of the American Bee Journal. We're going to also interview Jerry Hayes, who's the editor of Bee Culture. The American Bee Journal and Bee Culture are our two largest beekeeping magazines or periodicals here in the United States. And we're going to talk to those guys in detail about their periodical specifically. But Amy, I would argue that these things play a very important role in the life of any beekeeper really around the world.
Absolutely. I agree. When I first started beekeeping, I guess I don't realize what resources I had available to me at the time. So lucky you listeners get all this information just given to you by us. Hopefully you're listening.
Yeah, in my official opinion, we probably need to do a podcast, a greater podcast, an entire episode just on resources for beekeepers. Because, again, we're highlighting today just a couple of magazines that have quite a wide readership here in the U.S., but we know we've got listeners from all around the world, from over 35 countries at the moment. And I think it's important that they know what resources are available to them. The benefit of these periodicals, these magazines, is that they often come out with some regularity. It's not like a book that's frozen in time.
No, it's active. It's coming out in current times.
Yeah, nothing at all against books, but when a book is published, it's basically the state of the knowledge up until that point, and then it stops.
I was about to say, what have books ever done to you?
Yeah, I love reading, but it's frozen. Whereas these periodicals play such an important role. Just specifically ABJ, American Bee Journal and Bee Culture, they're published on a monthly basis here in the U.S. And likewise outside the U.S., the U.K. has its own popular journals, a few of them. One of them that comes to mind is Beecraft. South African beekeepers have their own beekeeping journal. The Australians have their own beekeeping journal, right? And the Germans have theirs. And so these are important for beekeepers.
How would you recommend beekeepers go and look for them?
So number one, for this particular episode, we're going to have show notes, on our website for this particular episode where they can go and find specifically information about finding American Bee Journal and Bee Culture. But what I would do if I were a beekeeper outside the U.S. or in any country for that matter, I would Google or do a search for my country's name, Bee Journal. And you might get a journal, you might get a newsletter, you might get a newspaper. There have been beekeeping newspapers in the past. For example, German Beekeeping Journal, Norwegian Beekeeping Journal, Italian Beekeeping Journal. And you're likely to find a periodical that's relevant to where you are. And Amy, I want to say one more thing too. We're highlighting again on our podcast to American bee journals, but it's important to know that you can learn a lot about beekeeping by reading bee journals from other countries. So is this an American-centric podcast episode? No, I would argue that American Bee Journal and Bee Culture are important for beekeepers around the world. But likewise, I would argue that journals from other countries are important for beekeepers here. Beekeepers here in the U.S. could learn a lot by reading those journals. And you don't always have to get a print copy. Some of these are available online.
Well, so that being said, being available online versus subscribing and actually getting a hard copy, how do beekeepers actually get into that? How do you subscribe for this? And I think we mentioned a couple times later on that mentorship is huge. And so just being able to share that, I heard that over and over again. So how do you subscribe and how do you move forward with getting these subscriptions?
Yeah, so I would again search for my country's name and then Bee Journal or Beekeeping periodical. And then I would go to that periodical's website and look for subscription information. I know that some of the ones here in the U.S. offer kind of dual subscription. You get a print copy, but you also get online access. And what you're going to probably find, at least with the two journals that we're going to highlight in today's episode, you're going to find that the readership is probably older than the standard readership. A lot of the beekeepers here in the U.S. are older individuals, but beekeeping is booming at the moment.
Absolutely.
There's beekeepers coming out of everywhere, and there's every age range and ethnic background and job background and education background and gender background. All people of all types from all over the place are getting into beekeeping.
That's what I love about beekeeping,
of course.
Actually.
And the journals are going to have to respond to that. So right now they're very print heavy, but trust me, we are heading in a direction where there will be, information available online through these sources, blogs, et cetera. Heck, we're even doing a podcast, so I know that other journals are going to follow suit and do very similar things.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to hear what Eugene and Jerry have to talk about today in our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thanks for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast, and we're going to get those interviews started shortly after the break. So, Amy, one of the things that beekeepers across the United States have as a resource is they have periodicals, books, they have online access to all this type of information about honeybees and beekeeping. But one of the longest running resources available is the American Bee Journal. American Bee Journal is one of a couple of national periodicals, magazines that we have about beekeeping. I've been reading it since I was a kid.
Did you know that we actually have a copy of the very first magazine?
The very first American Bee Journal? Really?
We do. Someone donated it.
Well, you've been holding out on me.
Well, it's sitting in the museum. So,
okay, well, maybe I should visit the museum every once in a while. So with the American Bee Journal specifically, I've been fortunate to be a columnist. In fact, I wrote one of my first publications, actually in 1996, I believe, was published in the American Bee Journal because I was an American Beekeeping Federation 4-H essay contest winner, and they published my essay in the ABJ in 1996. I didn't know you could
write and read when you were one.
Yeah, I've been doing this since I was a kiddo, since I was one. That's actually when I graduated high school. Anyway, and then I became a columnist some years ago and wrote a column series called Field Guide to Beekeeping. And now I'm the question and answer guy for the American Bee Journal. I'm not sure how I got that job, but I do my best. Well, for this segment, we have the guy who's at the very top, Eugene Makovec, who is the editor of the American Bee Journal. Eugene, welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast.
Good morning.
Hey, it's great to have you. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Foley, Missouri, which is where I live. It's on the eastern side of Missouri, along the Mississippi River.
Nice.
Well, great. Well, let's just kind of start from the beginning. Can you give us, Eugene, a little bit about your beekeeping background? How did you find yourself as the editor of the American Bee Journal?
Sure. I started beekeeping in 1996.
Well,
I'm actually third generation beekeeper. I grew up with bees. Never really had any interest in them when I was growing up, unfortunately, or I could have gotten a head start. But so I've been at this. This will be my 25th year. I was pretty heavily involved in the Missouri State Beekeepers, including editing the newsletter there, and got to know Joe Graham, the old editor of ABJ, and run into the date ants at conferences and things like that. And they would occasionally pick up. Joe would occasionally pick up articles of mine from the Missouri newsletter, so we knew each other at that point. And at some point, when Joe retired, they ran an ad for an editor, and I didn't see it. I was, like a lot of people, I get a couple months behind in my reading and things like that. And I sent Joe an email about something, got an out of office response to the effect that I'm no longer the editor. So about a year later, I just happened to be chatting with Gabe Dadant at a conference, and mentioned it to him, and was talking about this and that. And a couple of weeks later, Kirsten Trainer, who was editor for about 14, 15 months, stepped down and gave me a shout and said, "Are you interested in the job?" So I came up there and talked with them for a couple hours, and they offered me the job. So it was a pretty neat thing, and it was pretty sudden, and that actually worked out well for me because the printing company that I was working for had been bought out about a year prior, and things were kind of going downhill there.
Sure.
So it's good timing for me.
Well, let me ask then specifically. So how long have you been at ABJ?
So I took over at Thanksgiving time in 2018. So going on a year and a half.
Okay. And so what is, it's interesting when I think about journal editing, there's really kind of two parts to editing the American Bee Journal. First of all, you have to know the bee stuff, right? You've got to be able to vet that. You've got to know that. But secondly, you have to know how to write and edit other people's writing. So what's your background in that half of the endeavor?
I have a journalism degree.
Okay. That's helpful.
And so that helped. Yeah, I had that kind of sitting on the shelf for a while, and so that definitely comes in handy.
So you were able to take it off the shelf and dust it off, and it helped you out with ABJ.
Yeah, and with my couple of decades of beekeeping experience, that helps. And it's interesting that when I met Joe Graham the first time, I said, "You've been here a while, right?" And he said, "Yeah, you know what? I got out of journalism school, answered an ad in the paper, and I've been here ever since." Didn't know the first thing about bees or beekeeping at the time.
Really?
And of course, he's been a beekeeper now for a few years, but
sure.
But I just thought that was interesting.
That is fun.
And then you went from there to Kirsten Trainer, who was an entomologist.
Sure.
And so she had the other end of it, and I'm somewhere in between. I certainly have the beekeeping experience, and with my work with MSBA, I attended a lot of conferences, and listening to a lot of people like Jamie Ellis and people, the experts talk about various things. So I have a pretty good knowledge base, I feel, in that regard.
Yeah. So one of the things I appreciate as an author for the American Bee Journal, especially, now that I do the classroom series, is I appreciate that when I send you my manuscripts that you show me grammatical things that I can improve, which is good because I spend all of my time editing manuscripts for other people here at the University of Florida. So it's nice to have someone who's able to teach me a thing or two about correct English usage. So I think you do a good job, at least with the articles that I provide you. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I think that's important too. That was something that I didn't get when I would have things published in magazines. I didn't really. I would send something, and the next time I saw it was in print.
Sure.
It's nice to kind of get that feedback, and I get a lot of people thank me for that.
Sure. So Eugene, that's a good overview of you and your involvement, but you've been mentioning a few times, American Bee Journal, you've been mentioning the name Dadant, Gabe Dadant, et cetera. So what is American Bee Journal's link to Dadant? What is the history of the journal?
The journal was started in 1861.
Okay.
Wow.
We're the old guys. Bee culture didn't come along until about 5 years later or something.
So they're spring chickens.
Forever. But Samuel Wagner was the first editor, and he was hobnobbing with Langstroth and some of these other guys, and actually A.I. Root wrote for them in the early days too. He's the guy who later started Bee Culture, but Wagner was the first editor, and after he stepped down, I'm not sure if he stepped down or if he died, but Langstroth actually was assistant editor along with Wagner's son for a time before they moved on from there.
That's cool.
And at some point, I think it was about the late 1860s when Dadant took over publishing the Bee Journal.
Okay.
And they've published it ever since, and they also took over Langstroth's Hive and the Honeybee.
Sure. And
still publish that. The latest edition was 2015. It gets revised about every 15 to 20 years, give or take. So it's been in that Dadant family ever since, and the Dadant family, obviously runs Dadant and Sons. I'm working for 6th and 7th generation Dadants.
That's incredible.
That's a great thing. I mean, I really feel like it's a stable company to work for. They're training the next generation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the neat things about the American Bee Journal, the Hive and the Honeybee that you mentioned, and just Dadant in general, because of the link to the history of beekeeping here in the United States, but also around the world. I know that when I write articles for the American Bee Journal, I get people from outside the U.S. asking me questions about things that I said. So I know it's widely read.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the history, and Jamie, you have people from around the world kind of reading some of this stuff on there, and we have it all online. I was just wondering, I guess, who is reading these magazines? I mean, we have YouTube. We've got YouTube, I mean, so how have you guys been able to, just through history and through time, been able to work with different audiences, and who's reading this?
Yeah, and YouTube can be a great source for this and a lot of other things, but it's just a YouTube and Facebook and some of these other sources. It's just kind of hard to know what you're getting, especially early on. You and I can read stuff on Facebook and whatnot, and kind of pick through and know what makes sense and what does not. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And I think that the publications like ABJ and Bee Culture and others, they're that kind of there to help you separate the wheat from the chaff when you go through some of that information. We don't publish things unless they make some kind of sense.
Sure.
Now, obviously, different people have different opinions on a lot of things,
sure.
but if somebody sends me something that is just, I read it and it just sounds like nonsense, it doesn't make the journal, or if it does, it's clear that it's an opinion. And if I'm not sure about something, there are people that I know that I can run it by and get opinions too.
Yeah, so the title has the name journal in it, right? And you're talking about how, are you ultimately the person who's reading this and vetting what is right and what's wrong, or how does that process work? Are these articles, how does it work?
Yeah, depending on what it is. I typically am the one who decides, but again, like I said, if there's something that I'm unclear on, if there's something that I question, I go back and say, okay, can you show me support for this, what you're saying, because this is something that's new to me, and I'm not sure it makes sense. Please show me back this up with some source to say that this is true.
So Eugene, one of the things that I appreciate about the journal is as an extension worker who has an appointment extension, I find it very difficult sometimes to reach commercial beekeepers. They won't come to meetings, they won't read documents and things like that. And so I often wonder what's a good way to reach them. But if I put something in the ABJ, some commercial beekeeper is going to have read it. In fact, when I bump into commercial beekeepers here in the state, Florida and elsewhere, they'll mention to me things I said in the American Beekeeping, the American Bee Journal. And one of the things I think that's important is that it's a resource for all beekeepers, right? There are kind of hobbyist-centric articles there. There are sideline-centric articles, but there's a lot of things that commercial beekeepers rely heavily on in the pages of that journal. They read it and they do it. The stuff that they see is often published there, first, and then they will change management practices related to seeing that information in the journal.
Yeah, we try and appeal to a broad spectrum. The statement has been made that most beekeepers are hobbyists, but most bees are owned by commercial people. So if we target only commercial beekeepers, the audience is going to be fairly small.
Sure.
But we also have to have that information that they need, because, like you said, they are reading these magazines for information on how to be better beekeepers, and they're reading for the science also. And Amy, you mentioned the word journal being in our title. I've had people ask me that, this has the word journal in the title. That means it's a scientific publication, and these should be peer-reviewed articles in here, and that's not really the case. Yes, a lot of journal can sometimes mean, yes, it's a scientific journal, but it's also another name for magazine. I mean, I don't think Ladies' Home Journal, for example, was a peer-reviewed publication. It's just one of those. It's just part of the name, and it's been there all this time, and I'm not going to be the one to change it. But we do have some scientific things in there. Certainly, we don't typically publish peer-reviewed articles because not a lot of beekeepers want to slog through the scientific, the deep science like that. But they also understand that it's important to them, and that's why we have people like Scott McGart and Allie McAfee that have regular columns going through some of the latest scientists and basically distilling it down, saying this is what it means and this is, what it's going to look like in the future. There's some cutting edge research going on, and people say, oh my goodness, we're going to be able to just put mushrooms in our hives now and kill Varroa.
Sure. Wait, that doesn't work.
Kind of explain, hey, there's something there, but see us in a couple of years.
Yeah, it takes time.
That.
Sure. Well, let me make a statement, then I'm going to ask you a question. When I first became a scientist and started dabbling in research, almost 2 decades ago now, American Bee Journal did publish refereed manuscripts at the end of the journal. I remember there was like a research section, and a lot of the articles that were going there were very, applied, right? Very beekeeper friendly. And that's one of the few things that I really miss about the journal. I enjoyed having those in there and ABJ as a venue for publishing. But it's neat still, though, that your columnists will read refereed manuscripts and distill that information to beekeepers. I mean, that's extension at work. So let me ask you a question. So when a reader receives an American Bee Journal and they open its covers, what types of things are found in the ABJ's pages? Walk us through a standard journal from beginning to kind of end. What regular columns do you have? How do you invite certain topics to fill in your more open articles? What's in the pages of the American Bee Journal?
Okay. Well, first, let me just address what you said about the rough read articles in the back, because I remember seeing those too back when I started. I asked Joe Graham about this one when I took this job. I spent a week working with Joe. He kind of popped out of retirement to help do an issue, and I came in at the end of that at that time, and I mentioned that to him, and he said, "Yeah, we had a peer-reviewed section." For a while, and his comment was nobody read it. Yeah. Obviously you read it. Some people did, but I think there wasn't a big audience for that among the general readership. So the science is important, but we do more of a distilled down version of these things.
Sure.
But the typical magazine, when it comes out, you open it up and you find beyond just the letters to the editor and stuff, we have the classroom where Jerry Hayes did that for years and years, and Amy, just for your information, it took me a little finagling to talk Jamie into taking this over.
Oh yeah,
I ran it by him, and he was kind of, well, let me think. And,
it's hard to take on additional responsibilities. I loved writing the field guide for beekeeping for ABJ. I still would love to restart that, but it just kept me up until 2 and 3 in the morning putting those articles together. Yeah. So it's just tough. But the classroom's easier because I answer questions. Yeah, the classroom's a little bit easier because essentially for you listeners out there, the classroom is just a question and answer. You email me questions and I do my best to answer them. That's the strategy there.
Yeah, but you're doing a great job with it. We really you've been well received.
Oh, good.
And we have things like the columns I mentioned, Allie and Scott with their scientific columns. We've got Randy Oliver is a big draw and has been for a few years now. He's kind of an on-the-ground researcher. He's a commercial beekeeper, and he does a lot of research on an applied science thing, and it's not peer-reviewed, and he's open, and we're open about that. But it's something that a lot of people flip that magazine open, and that's the first thing they read because they like that he's one of us.
Sure.
He's not just in a lab somewhere.
Sure.
But we have a lot of things. I get a lot of things sent to me just out of the blue, and that was one of the things that surprised me, just how much comes across my desk. And some of it's great, some of it, not so much, but a lot of it we really like to do kind of the how-to stuff, how to build this, how to design, put this attachment on my hive to keep hive beetles out and various things like that. And people find that kind of thing interesting. And that was one of the things Joe told me early on. People just want to be better beekeepers, and they want to know what they can do to improve their chances and produce more honey and things like that. So we have a lot of those types of articles.
But don't you also, management related, but don't you guys also, if I'm not mistaken, you have honey market article, you have your editorial, you guys also make announcements on behalf of the bee clubs around the country, who's speaking where, what events are coming up, things like that as well?
Yeah, we have news and events. Yep. That's a popular thing, and we have clubs all over sending us their events. And March 21st, we've got such and such a conference, and we put that in. We have an online calendar where we put those things also.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how often these magazines come out. I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, it's a monthly. It's a monthly. It actually, there was a time when ABJ was a weekly magazine. One of our regular columnists, Wyatt Mangum, writes a lot about history of beekeeping, historical beekeeping equipment and various things. And he had an article a while back about, I think he called it When ABJ Was Weekly, and he's talking about how it was a completely different magazine 100 years ago or something. It's funny how things have changed.
Yeah, so basically I think it's fair to say if it is a topic related to beekeeping or apiculture, it will show up at some point in the journal, right? Prices, questions, research, new gadgets, all of those kinds of things show up in its pages.
Yeah, and we do occasionally talk about other bees, other pollinators and things. One of our columnists, Rusty Burlew, is really big on the native insects and native pollinators. She writes things now and then. She actually works for a website called iNaturalist, which is something that I've used in the past. I go around the yard and take photos of various things. I look for honeybees and I find all these other things and I don't know what the heck they are. And I go on this iNaturalist and they identify them. They have volunteers who identify them for you, and Rusty is one of these people that does that, and so she's got a broad knowledge on honeybees and every other type of bee or wasp imaginable, and how they differ. And I think that's interesting to beekeepers on a now and then basis.
Sure. Well, let me ask kind of a conclusion type question. So what does the future of the American Bee Journal look like? How's it going to look 20, 30, 40 years from now? What role do you think it's going to play in beekeeping?
I would like to think that we're still going to be a print magazine at that point, but you never know. Things are moving more and more to digital. I still like to spread out a newspaper in front of me and read a hard copy of something. But beekeeping, of course, is changing. I would also like to think that we won't be talking about varroa mite on a monthly basis anymore.
That'd be nice.
That's wishful thinking.
Yep.
But we're always going to have those challenges, and we're always going to have the need for good resources to help to address those challenges. I think that we're going to have more and more digital resources probably as well, and hopefully we'll be a part of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as I've shared with you, I really believe that American Bee Journal has an important role in helping beekeepers. Beekeepers read it. They change their management based on what they read in the pages. And honestly, to me, that's one of the biggest rewards that I can see from subscribing to it, right? You learn stuff that makes you a better beekeeper. You learn tricks of the trade, and it connects you to the greater world of beekeeping and lets you know what's going on out there. And so, Eugene, I really appreciate your time joining us. You've been a great guest here on Two Bees in a Podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's been Eugene Makovec. He is the editor of the American Bee Journal. Look it up online, subscribe to it. You will not be sorry.
Have questions or comments? Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at UF Honeybee Lab.
So, Amy, I am kind of super duper excited.
Super duper excited?
Yeah, super duper excited because for a couple reasons. Reason number one, in this particular segment, we are continuing our discussion on some of the national periodicals that are shaping beekeeping here in the U.S., and that one being Bee Culture. That's the first reason I'm excited to talk about Bee Culture. But I'm even more excited because the editor of Bee Culture, Jerry Hayes, is a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine who I've known for, 15, almost 18 or so years. He and I worked together here in Florida when he was here as the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services apiary inspection head. And then when he went on and worked in industry, and I even know him today, so I'm really, really excited to have him on board.
Sounds like you guys are besties.
Yeah, BFFs.
Yep, BFF. Do you guys have like friendship bracelets?
Yeah, you see it here? So for you,
that $100 a month payment to Jamie really works out.
That's
really
right. Well, so just to give the listeners some background, we're joined today by Jerry Hayes, who is the editor of Bee Culture. That is why he's here on our Two Bees in a Podcast. I'm going to try hard to keep all of my questions related to bee culture, even though there's so much I want to talk to Jerry about because I know him so well. Hey, Jerry, how are you doing?
Good. No, and thank you for this. This is exciting to be able to do this with you and see Amy there and think about our history together. This is great.
Yeah. So Jerry, just as a quick caveat, we're going to have you on future episodes of Two Bees in a Podcast talking about all kinds of the stuff that you know and have done for the beekeeping industry. But today I'm going to do my best to keep it to just an interview about bee culture. So before we get into bee culture specifically, can you briefly tell me your journey into beekeeping and what led you to be the editor of Bee Culture?
Oh, I don't know that I can do this quickly, but okay, here we go. I started out in life as a high school teacher and I hated it. Okay. And so went into another business and had a guy working with me who was a beekeeper from Wisconsin. And I thought, well, this is very cool. Everybody knows about honeybees, but nobody actually knows a beekeeper because this was many years ago.
Before beekeeping was cool, right, Jerry?
Before beekeeping was cool, and have somebody say there was a beekeeper was just a little bit weird.
And then there's a place called Wisconsin.
Yeah, and yeah. And he had a cheese thing on his head, and so the whole thing. So, it was interesting. And so I kind of picked his brain and asked all the questions that, somebody might ask, and became more interested and fascinated. And then I started reading things, and short story is I turned into the consummate backyard beekeeper. Sure. I did all the things backyard beekeepers do. I made things. I squished queens. I did, all the things that you do.
Yeah.
And so I thought at one point, this is pretty cool. And my passion had grown. Could I actually take care of a family, provide for family doing this? And so, I had a very patient wife and went back to school to Ohio State University, had an apiculture program back there under Dr. Jim too.
Sure.
And that probably was one of the top 3 or 4 things I have ever done in my life. It was great. Jim was great, motivated me even more. And it was fantastic. And so then I went to USDA Bee Breeding and Stock Lab in Baton Rouge for a little while. And then up the river to Day Sons for quite a few years, where I started writing the classroom and wrote the book, The Classroom. Mm-hmm. And then had an opportunity to go to Florida and fill the role of chief of the apiary inspection section after Mr. Cutts. And then from there, I went to
I won't tell anyone,
Monsanto.
Jerry.
Yeah, I was a honeybee.
Wasn't expecting that one.
This is a podcast for beekeepers, don't you, Jerry?
Well, you can cut that part out. And so, no, but I was a honeybee health lead. And so they had a technology at the time using RNAi, mm-hmm. Which we can talk about or not. It was a big company with a lot of money. And, some people beat me up, but some people thought I was good for me to be there as an ambassador for the industry. Sure. And so went from there, and now I'm, it's kind of my swan song here, I think, is had the opportunity to become editor of Bee Culture magazine, which has unbelievable history associated with it, and be able to learn and work with beekeepers in a different way. So this is pretty exciting.
So Jerry, let's talk specifically about that history of bee culture. Just as a quick aside, I've been keeping bees since I was 12, and my mentor liked Bee Culture. That's the magazine he preferred. So he talked me into subscribing to it. So it carried me through all of my early beekeeping years as I read the pages of this journal. So it's funny to know that Bee Culture even predates me. So let's talk a little bit about the history. What do you know about the history of Bee Culture?
Well, and there's a lot of history to Bee Culture, and it all starts with A.I. Root,
sure,
in Medina, Ohio, who kind of accidentally fell into beekeeping too he was a jeweler in Medina and had a swarm land on his building. He captured a swarm, tried to put it in a hive, it flew away. Anyway, he became more fascinated as well with honeybees and got into and became a beekeeper. And he was an amazing entrepreneur also.
Sure.
He started making, beekeeping equipment because this was the late 1800s and none of this had solidified as yet. And then with that engagement, he started writing, questions and answers, answering people, and decided to kind of formulate that into something more specific and started the magazine, Bee Culture magazine. And it's been in the family ever since. Kim Flottam, you can never replace Kim Flottam, but whoever I took the place of Kim Flottam, was here for 34 years.
Wow.
And then there was, DeMuth before him, and just all sorts of people that have been connected to the beekeeping industry, for over 100 years.
Well, Jerry, do you happen to know how many volumes and issues of Bee Culture have been published?
I have no earthly idea.
So what year did it start? Was it in the 1860s?
Yeah, 1860.
What a lucky guess.
And so it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because we have across the road is the big candle factory, which used to be the beekeeping supply where they cut woodenware. And anyway, it's candles now. But up on the third floor, which is kind of quiet and like the Twilight Zone up there, they have boxes and boxes and boxes of past issues of Bee Culture.
Wow.
For instance, I was up there looking around, and you get all the bird droppings off things and everything else, and you'll have a whole box of 1933.
Wow.
Or a whole box of 1945, and it's incredible that we have, to me, this history, and we need to preserve that somehow.
Sure, I completely agree. I know a brand new beekeeping museum in Florida.
So I'm wondering who's reading Bee Culture. Oh my goodness.
Now that's the funniest thing ever. So Hey Jerry apparently sounds like Hey
Siri. My phone just went off.
It's going to go off again.
They are listening and they're watching. Okay.
So anyway, Jerry, I'll see if I can do what Amy couldn't.
Wait, let me try one more time.
Who reads Bee Culture?
So we actually, and Kim Flottam had done this several times, about every 5 or 6 years, do a survey of who is reading, which is a great thing. And so our readers are primarily 55 years and older.
Okay.
They have retired or getting close to retirement, have moved to the country, are probably my age, read the Mother Earth News in 1975 and wanted to save the world back then. And now beekeeping allows them to try to do that. So it's primarily hobby, backyard, some commercial beekeepers who, there again, have this new passion for honeybees and the environment, and Bee Culture fills that interest and need for them.
But Bee Culture is read around the world, right? I mean, how many countries do you ship Bee Culture to? I'm curious.
About 40.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you, I'm just wondering, as far as how you did your evaluation, because that's kind of my specialty. How do you give out the surveys?
Oh, yeah. So, of course, we have the list of subscribers and with their email addresses or their postal addresses, and we just send them all out. We have about 15,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And so the data is actually pretty decent. Certainly not all 15,000 respond, but we have enough that we're pretty confident that that's what it is.
That's amazing.
So someone grabs a copy or an issue of Bee Culture, they open its pages, and what do they find? What types of columns are in there? What types of information are published on its pages?
Yeah, and so, and let me just step back here because Kim did an outstanding job for 34 years, but this is Jerry, and I have some other needs, wants, and desires for this. So what we're going to be doing, of course, is addressing new beekeepers' needs, different hive styles. We have Dr. Jay Evans, who writes a column. Dr. Clarence Collison writes a column. I have Joe Trainer, who's in the almond industry out west, writing a new column. I was just putting together the May issue, and we have Dr. Becky Masterman from University of Minnesota is going to be writing columns. And this is all this is educational outreach. My goal, want, and desire is for beekeepers to be successful.
Sure.
And there are too many places to go on the web that are a little shaky. And so I want people to have trust and confidence in bee culture, that the information and the authors there will help them be successful.
So do you have like question and answer sections? Do you have like what biology topics, management topics? I remember when I was a kid, my mentor really preferred the honey market section. He would often price his honey based on what he was seeing in that honey market. So tell us a little bit about the content of the columns.
Yeah, and so here, and I'll just, in fact, like I said, I was putting together the May issue already, and so we have. Of course, the contents, which is features. Then we have mail.
Sure.
People write in articles.
So,
then we have
letters to the editor, essentially.
Letters to the editor.
Yep.
And then I have the editor's page. And Kim was much better than I am about writing about the meeting he went to or what have you. And so, as you know, I'm kind of mixing this up. I did an interview with you, and I've done some other interviews. This one's going to be more like my question and answer that used to be in the classroom.
Sure.
Then we have the honey report, what's going on, what's selling. And then next month, which is kind of telling readers, what do I need to do in May?
Yep, that's
because all these new beekeepers. Then we have the formal question and answer section called Bee Talk, which this month or for May have Bob Sears from Missouri, Kim Scrim from Massachusetts, and I forget who the other person was. Mary Reed from Texas.
Yep.
Going to answer a couple questions. Then we have new products that we want to highlight. And then a new one that I wanted to start is, and I don't know what the title is going to be, but it's AIA is helping me out with this. And so what we're going to do is highlight each state's apiary inspector.
Sure, that's a good idea.
A little bit of what they do in their state and what have you. So that's going to be a series as well. And then we have Jay Evans in his column. And then I have John Miller, a commercial beekeeper from out west, commenting on almond pollination. Then another new series I'm starting is focused on Canada and research out of Canada. And then, for instance, we have the next one is 10 rules of communicating pesticide rules. And then I have Clarence Collison, Becky Masterman from University of Minnesota. Then I have Tina Sebastian, who's done a series on horizontal beekeeping. Then we have Jim Two's column that's been in there forever. Everybody loves Jim.
Sure.
And then we have Eric Osterland from Norway talking about $1 million that Norway got for varroa control. Connie Krochmal, who's going to do what blooming in spring. Ann Harmon's column. Then I have another one on just kind of a one-pager on what is propolis and why might it have some value to not only bees but beekeepers. And so that's kind of what I'm shooting for, but a little bit different, of course, every month. I don't want to be boring.
I mean, that's pretty incredible. That's a huge diversity of topics in any month that's going to change. And as you said, you're already in over 40 countries. So clearly there's stuff in the pages of Bee Culture that readers want to see, right? I mean, when I read it, and when I read it as a kid, and when I hear my colleagues reading it now, they're learning things about keeping bees. It's clearly appealing to people around the world. So what role then in general do you believe that Bee Culture plays in beekeeping today, but as well as beekeeping in the next 20 to 50 to 100 years?
Great questions. I think there again, it's educational outreach, providing accurate information, and perhaps even causing people to pause and think about the industry, about what they're doing, about how it's connected to the environment, because this isn't a static hobby or profession or anything else. And then in the future, certainly would like to have Bee Culture be the premier beekeeping magazine that people say, oh, did you see that in Bee Culture? Not that I don't love American Bee Journal or Eugene, but my goal here is to be the best, and that's my goal.
That's our goal too.
Well, good, Amy. I'm glad you said that.
Jerry, so I was just wondering, as far as the content that's being released, who vets that information? Is that just you? Do you have a group of people going through and reading drafts? And, you're laughing right now at me. Why are you laughing? Do you make everything up? Is everything a lie?
Are you the gatekeeper, Jerry?
Yeah, and the reason I smiled was because Amy asked me a question that made me pause, because, we all talk and on the 6 o'clock news and everything else about, teams and have you vetted this with this person?
Sure,
And I have to admit, I haven't done any of that.
That's fair. I'm glad you're being honest.
You're the omniscient editor.
Well, I don't know about that.
And omnipresent. You're everywhere, all-knowing, and the ultimate authority, Jerry.
Just like Santa Claus.
It's not who I was thinking, but I was maybe so.
But no, and to get back to this has been fun for me, because these are things that I think are valuable and important, and then I get these other people to express their ideas down that path. And for me right now, hopefully it's fun, and hopefully it's readable and valuable to those reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt for a second that it is. I told Eugene, the editor of American Bee Journal, when we were interviewing him, I run into commercial beekeepers quite a bit, hobbyists and sidelines, et cetera. But they will often know me from the pages of the journal. And when I publish in ABJ, or in the past when I published in Bee Culture, I'd have colleagues or beekeepers really from around the world contact me and say, hey, I saw you publish this article and I have this question. So, these are important resources for beekeepers, not just in the States, but absolutely everywhere. And so, you as the editor of Bee Culture, you're carrying on a tradition, right? Bee Culture has a very storied, respected tradition, but it's also beyond just tradition management. It's important to have Bee Culture now to help beekeepers address the issues that they are having today. And it's nice to see that you also have a strategy for developing that further in the future. So let's talk a little bit more about the future. I mean, right now you're a print magazine, and a lot of people are going online and blogs and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and online periodicals. What do you plan to do? You mentioned your readership's 55 and older, but that won't always be the case, right? A lot of these new beekeepers are...
Yeah, they'll be 75 or older.
That's right. A lot of these new beekeepers are young. How do you get Bee Culture into their hands? How do you use technology? What's your plan for moving it in that direction?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly where we're going, because we have hard copies because some people just like hard copies,
Sure.
the older ones, but as we all die, that's gonna morph a little bit. And yeah, so we have a digital edition that we're working on, and I don't know if you're familiar with Catch the Buzz.
Yep,
that's our daily digital thing that goes out to about 40,000 people.
Wow.
And so we're doing that, and I get there again. I sound like a Hitler or something here. I get to pick out those articles and format those and pick the pictures out and what have you for those daily releases. But yes, you're right. The digital component of this has to grow, should grow. And in concert with that, one of the things I wanted to do with the magazine was make the articles smaller, shorter.
Sure.
The days of when everything was 5 and 6 pages and no pictures, nobody cares.
Yeah.
So my goal is,
I care, Jerry. I care.
Well, do you have a subscription, Amy?
We'll get one soon.
Well, Jay, I like that as an author. That's actually appealing to me because I've always felt compelled to write these long articles to be thorough. But I like the idea of writing 2 or 3 or 4 page articles and filling them with pictures. That saves the writing. So it certainly helps. And
picture, you're right, because we're all visual creatures, and I envision people sitting down and thumbing through Bee Culture, and if it's all just print, nobody's going to do that in 2020. Sure. So you gotta have some pictures, big pictures, gets their attention for 3 seconds, and maybe then get them to read the article, and the headline has to be a little bit different. So, I hate to say this, but every magazine and every article is a product, and how do you make that product appealing to the customer so that they'll take advantage of the product?
Yeah. Well, Jerry, let me ask you one last question then. So how do our listeners find and subscribe to Bee Culture?
Well, you can go to www.beeculture.com, and that's our website, and it will have information about subscriptions and do you want the digital, do you want the hard copy, do you want to sign up for Catch the Buzz, and can I be capitalistic here for a second?
Sure thing.
All right. So generally,
no socialist here.
Generally, a year subscription to Bee Culture is like $25.
Okay.
For those listening into this podcast, I'll cut that in half to $12.50.
Whoa!
What?
If you're listening to Two Bees in a Podcast, you can subscribe to Bee Culture.
Wait, what if you're a host? Do I get a quarter? Do I get to pay a quarter of the price?
Yeah, divvy it up with Jamie.
$6.
Well, Jerry, I really appreciate you joining us today on Two Bees in a Podcast. Listening to what you talk about with bee culture and the value it is to beekeepers is really great. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us.
Oh, golly, no, I'm thanking you for this opportunity. And there again, I have to think how much fun has it been? What have we been able to do and experience because of honeybees?
I know. And it's not even over, Jerry. It's not even over.
Nobody gets to do that. And we travel the world because of honeybees, and honeybees impacts our lives and our environment. I just get goosebumps every day.
Jerry, we're doing a podcast on honeybees, which is not something I thought I'd say when I was 10 or 15. But nevertheless, Jerry, thank you for joining us. Jerry Hayes is the editor of Bee Culture. Thanks again, Jerry.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's everybody's favorite game show, Stump the Chump.
All right, it's about that time. It's our question and answer time. Here we are. Jamie, I don't know about you, but I'm sitting in my closet right now because it's coronavirus time and we just have to work from home. So we're just going to continue.
So just to let people know, though, we're in our respective closets, not because we're hiding from the virus.
That's right. It's good to clarify that.
Yeah, we're in our respective closets because that's the quietest, best place in the house to record. In Amy's case, I guess you tried some other rooms and it was echoey. In my case, I have 4 children and a wife who are somewhere around the house. So if I hide out in my closet, the clothes will muffle the sound a bit and hopefully keep the sound quality high and the background noise low, in addition to keeping coronavirus outside of our house.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have a couple of questions from the audience and our listeners. And the first question we have is about Africanized honeybees. So this person, Steven, on Twitter
You just created something.
asked, so they want to know more about African honeybees. And they're wondering, why doesn't the African honeybee gene pool get watered down as they mate with more varieties in the US? It seems like maybe their genetics must be pretty dominant.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information to know here, and I'm going to just try to answer it as quickly as I can. But the short answer is we start a little bit from the beginning. We work with Apis mellifera. That's the western honeybee. Its natural distribution is Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So starting with that background, African bees are simply African subspecies of the same honeybees that we keep. So we tend to call our bees European honeybees. That just simply means that they came from Europe hundreds of years ago. They're more appropriately called European-derived honeybees. They're no longer European. They haven't been there for hundreds of years. The same is true for African bees. We keep African-derived honeybees. But because the African subspecies of honeybees are the same species as the European subspecies of honeybees, they can completely hybridize. So then, specifically to your question, how are African bees so successful? Why don't they have traits that get watered down? Well, there's a lot of things that contribute to the perpetuation of kind of the African bee phenotype expression of the traits in this particular bee. Just going down a quick list, their genes are dominant. For example, defensiveness. When you cross a gentle European honeybee with a more defensive African honeybees, you tend to get a more defensive hybrid, not a gentle hybrid. Simple things such as their offspring develop faster. Our typical worker bees will develop in 21 days. African worker bees will develop in about 20 days. The same is true for queens. Their queens will develop faster than ours. So imagine a situation where you've got a queen in your colony that's mated with 10 European drones and 1 African drone, and they go queenless. Statistically, the odds are that if they go to make a queen, that the queens from the African lineage will develop faster than the queens from the European lineage, so they'll emerge first. So it's a lot of little things like this that compound, that ultimately skew the pendulum in favor of African bees to the exclusion of European bees. So as a result, you tend to get this perpetuation of the African bee in the environment. They also swarm a lot more, so they produce a mess load more colonies. They produce more drones per colony proportionately than our colonies do. So just these little factors are just a few of the things that they do that collectively push things in the direction of the perpetuation of this particular subspecies. You would think superficially that they should be watered down quickly, but the opposite is actually true. They just are a strong bee. Where they can survive, they quickly become the dominant subspecies of honeybee present, or the dominant derived honeybee from that particular subspecies.
It's like the survival of the fittest, really.
Yeah, they're an amazing bee. They really, truly are.
Awesome. Okay, so for our next question, is checking a hive once a week or even more than that, is that bad for the colony? How often should we be going through it? And, how often is too often?
Well, I tell people who ask me that question, this is usually a very beginner beekeeper question. Am I working my bees too much? And I always tell people, if you're a brand new beekeeper that first year, don't worry about working your bees too much. Going into your colonies will teach you a lot. You'll get to experience a lot with the bees. You'll enjoy the work. You'll learn a lot about them. But by the time, you're rocking and rolling that second season, generally speaking, you go into your colonies once every 1 to 2 weeks during production season. That's usually spring and early summer when they're making honey. Usually about every 2 to 3 weeks in summer, and maybe every 3 to 4 weeks in fall. And then you usually only go about once a month in winter. And that's more kind of standard practices. Amy, we actually have a document that I wrote for the American Bee Journal some years ago that talk about the time requirements of working honeybees. And we can make sure and share a link to that document in the notes section, so that people who are interested in, how much time does it take to work colonies and how much time should I invest in working colonies, they can have those answers kind of in that document that I developed some years ago.
Awesome. And we'll share that in the additional notes and resources.
Good deal.
So that leads me, I guess, to the last question of the Q&A segment. And that is, right now, if you aren't checking your bees right now in Florida as we record, there are a lot of swarms that are happening. So can you talk about what to do if a swarm happens? Some people don't actually want to either split or to catch swarms, but what do you do when you you start seeing all these swarms and you'd only really plan on having 1 or 2 colonies.
Yeah, so, just for point of reference for our listeners, we are recording this kind of in late March 2020, so that's the beginning of our swarm season in Florida. But it doesn't really matter when your respective swarm seasons start, you're going to have a swarm season. So if you're a beekeeper and you don't want more colonies and you've got to practice swarm control, you really need to stay on top of that. In fact, in my opinion, one of the pillars of bee management is effective swarm control. You want your bees to stay put so that you can maximize the number of bees that you have in that colony to do the work that they need to do. And incidentally, bees most want to swarm when you least want them to. They prefer to swarm during honey production season, which is when you need them most to be home. So we've got another good document on swarm management techniques we can put in the show notes. But one of the things I want to say is, what happens if you're out there and you're not a beekeeper and a swarm shows up on your property? A colony establishes in a tree trunk, in a wall of a house, etc. What should you do? Well, there's a couple of options for you. You can contact a beekeeper who hopefully will have some experience providing swarm or colony removal services for you. And incidentally, given that in some states swarm removal or colony removal is considered pest control, you need to make sure that if that's the case in your state, the beekeepers are trained and carry all the appropriate licenses or insurance, et cetera, because they might be considered, quote, practicing pest control. So you can contact beekeepers. They'll come and often try to remove those colonies live. They want to get those bees and rehabilitate them, put them in their colonies or hives and manage them further. The second option is you can contact a pest control operator. So if bees show up in your wall or chimney or tree, et cetera, you contact a pest control operator and they're going to come out and eradicate the bees. And so usually you have those two options. You have beekeepers who will provide the removal services and pest control operators who will provide the eradication services. In both cases, you want to make sure that the individuals involved are adequately trained and insured and all of that stuff. And incidentally, Amy, as you know, we've got quite a few documents on this topic that we can put in the show notes as well. So from the beekeeper's perspective, you'll want to control swarming. From the homeowner and business owner, whoever's perspective, if you've got swarms or colonies moving in, you need to have those dealt with as well. So it's important to know what to do kind of on both ends of this particular spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's my number one call or email or, request inquiry from people, is just that they have a swarm and it's come in and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
if
you're not a beekeeper, it's freaky, right? You have this colony move into your property, you're not sure what to do. But responsibly, you should either contact a beekeeper, which of course be our recommendation. The beekeeper's trained and can remove it safely, or contact a pest control operator.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And with the listeners out there, thanks for your patience. The sound quality isn't going to be exactly like what it's been like in the studio, but we're trying our best to put out content and continue putting out content
and keep
during
those
this
questions
time.
coming. Yeah, sure.
We'd like to give an extra special thank you to the following: to our editors, Shelby Howell and Bailey Carroll, and to our audio engineer, James Weaver. Without their hard work, Two Bees in a Podcast would not be possible. So thank you.
For more information and additional resources for today's episode, don't forget to visit the UF-IFAS Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory's website, ufhoneybee.com. Do you have questions you want answered on air? If so, email them to honeybee@ifas.ufl.edu or message us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at UF Honeybee Lab. While there, don't forget to follow us. Thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.